I don't have a lot of answers for $2.6 billion problems.
So just to be clear, there's a B on the front of that one? B as in
$2.6 billion is the Fish and Wildlife Service current estimate on infrastructure needs refuge system wide.
I mean, I would point first to our history. This is what Delta does. I mean, through my time here, and I would say through any look into the history of Delta from its earliest beginnings, this is what we tend to do. We tend to look at the largest, most impossible problem and then go deal with it, because we understand that those are the problems that have the largest impact and effect on the duck hunting community.
We're the duck hunters organization, and we're going to do big, hard things. Ultimately, duck habitat that's no good for duck hunters is no good to ducks either. So there's this sort of synergistic play here that I think we improve conditions for ducks at the same time we're creating high quality hunting opportunity for duck hunters.
Delta Waterfowl is the duck hunters organization, and what we're doing is managing out here to increase duck production.
The Voice of the Duck Hunter, a podcast presented by Delta Waterfowl. Brought to you by Rig'em and Lucky Duck.
Welcome to a very special episode of Delta Waterfowl's The Voice of the Duck Hunter podcast. I'm your host, Joel Bryce. Delta Waterfowl just announced what could turn out to be one of the greatest undertakings in our storied history, the Restoring Our Refuges initiative. Restoring Our Refuges is about both restoration of vital habitat for migrating waterfowl up and down the flyways, and about rebuilding quality hunting access that has been lost as habitat in the National Wildlife Refuge system and state wildlife management areas has degraded. Joining me today are two of my longtime Delta colleagues. They are at the very point of our Restoring Our Refuges spear. Delta CEO Jason Tharpe and Chief Policy Officer John Devney. They're going to reveal how Restoring Our Refuges has the power to positively change waterfowl hunting in North America as we know it. From many of the reports we're getting in so far this season, there's no time to waste. With that introduction, let's get started. Jason Tharpe, John Devney, welcome back to the podcast.
Good to be on.
Yeah.
Thanks for having us.
That sounds so funny. I know everybody's going to go, Joel says this every time, but yeah, you're a few doors down, your kitty corner opposite side of the building, but being in the same building, we don't talk that much, right? One of us or all of us are traveling, or if we're here in the office, we're talking about something else. So I love these conversations. And thank you guys for coming on. John, I think you still get, FYI, we are making a handful of T-shirts, so you're going to get one. You're gonna get one too.
Yeah, because you're the CEO, not that you've earned it.
I understood.
Yeah. So there you go. So there will be some T-shirts, and so maybe we'll do a reveal the next time we get you on.
We had a conversation about the T-shirts, Jason, just so you know, because I told them they have to make accommodations for, child's large if they're going to get a T-shirt with me.
Yeah.
We don't know if that was going to be more expensive or cheaper. We didn't know, but we had a conversation about it the last time.
We've got some really good partnerships in the industry. I think we can accommodate all the different size ranges, let's say, we have in the office. Yeah, we got quite a few.
Yeah, we have, John, I have some envy there that he has access to discount clothing, overstocked, odd-sized clothing, so it's awesome.
Every year. He gets, brand new Danner boots for $12 every year. I shouldn't say that. Danner's going to change their pricing schedules.
Yeah. The nicest thing, John, is you play along. So that.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I know where I am in the world. So.
Yeah, we'll have some fun at your expense. So that's good. Well, again, thanks, guys. I think we'll jump right in here. This is a big deal for Delta, what we're about to talk about, the Restoring Our Refuges. And I'll provide just a little bit of background. I would point everybody back on to episode 70 of this podcast. John, you were on, and one of your staff, Cyrus Baird, was also on. And we spent a lot of time talking about the problem. And I think the title of that episode 70, July 17th, this last summer, kind of gives it away. It says, "Where Ducks Once Flew, the Infrastructure Crisis on Public Hunting Lands." So I think one of the things we both, the three of us have worked here for a long time. John, you're over 25 years. I'm 3 months shy. You're a year behind me. Wow, we're probably got 75 years of combined experience here. So one of the things that's been common is, hunter success ebbs and flows over time, but it usually gets better, right? And I think one of the things that I feel like we're kind of stuck in this, I'm having a bad duck season narrative. And it's spanning those that own their own property and those that hunt on public land. So that really caught our attention. And as the Duck Hunters organization, we want to put more ducks in the fall flight. We want to work on regulations that are beneficial to hunters. John, you have a whole team assembled to make sure that hunting access is maintained or increased or restored. But the other thing that's really crept in here is one of the prides of, I think, hunting in the United States is the public land that the American public has access to. So you don't just have to own land, you have public land. But we've seen this, I guess, a growing lack of success, lack of infrastructure on these public lands. And it's brought us to this point where restoring our refuges, put a name to it. And wow, it's going to be all over the place. And this is part of the initial release and drumbeat. Jason, could you give us a little background, I guess, or statement? What is the mission of Restoring Our Refuges?
Yeah, I'll add a little bit of context to it as well, I think. So it's really started with a discussion about how ducks are distributing across the landscape. And that was a result of repeated years of phone calls from duck hunters, continually expressing their dissatisfaction with their hunting success. But then, as you pointed out, starting to get phone calls from people we would anticipate under normal circumstances would have a pretty good season, private landowners, well-managed duck clubs, those kinds of things. And that really led us to look at the problem overall. Now, we came up with 5 different components that we felt like are contributing to something that's going on with duck distribution, and would stop short of saying migration changes and shifts like that. We've seen some really good research in the last few years that shows us what's happening in terms of migration generally. But there does appear to be something in terms of how the birds are collecting at where they're distributing to. And so it just so happened it coincided with a perfect storm that I think the best policy team in waterfowl conservation is our team. And they'd been working on this issue for quite some time. We know that to recruit a future generation of hunters, they have to have a place to go, right? So we know that recruitment in our R3 work is intrinsically linked to access and opportunity. And so our policy team's been working on this for a long time. So it just so happened that coming through the COVID period, they were afforded opportunities to really dig into this issue. Mm-hmm. And it really coincided with some shifts in the phone calls from the people we were getting calls from, and especially the South, that something's going on here. Something's not right. And it was really just the perfect storm of things coming together, that there is an opportunity because there's a problem in the federal and state system with how public lands have been managed over the last decade or so, maybe 20 years. And that's one of the identified issues that we believe is contributing to how ducks are distributing. And so those things came together. And so we sat down with the policy team and we basically laid out what is it that we think we can contribute, what could be done. And I would say it really breaks down on the federal and the state side. Mm-hmm. So on the federal side, John can certainly speak to more specifics than I can, but I think there's a few different issues. Number one, there's some immediate needs that the refuge system has. Immediate needs. Right now, they need dollars to fix failed infrastructure. I don't want to say even failing. I'm saying failed infrastructure. But they also need secure long-term funding. I'm sure we're going to get into. There's been some pretty dramatic either decreases in budgets or just lack of increases in budgets that have led the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service to be in a difficult position as it pertains to the refuges. At the state level, it's a little bit of a different issue, but very similar. You have public lands, primarily WMAs. There's going to be a lot of different solutions that may emerge at that level, but we want to work with the states in order to help them find those solutions and then execute those solutions so that those public lands are in good shape for hunters who enjoy them. And we've got a couple examples of things we're already working on in that regard. And then there's also our chapter system, which is very unique in the sense that they get to contribute to our programmatic success by spending a portion of the dollars they raise with their banquets. And so we're going to work with our chapters and help them find and deliver public lands projects that help all the hunters in their communities. And so the combination of working on some issues at the federal level and some issues at the state level, as well as in conjunction with our chapters, I think is really the point of Restore Our Refuges. It's really just an aggregation of a lot of energy around the problems facing our public lands, federal and state, and what solutions can we bring to them. Primarily the solutions are dollars, and then it's getting those dollars in the hands of those managers and those staff so they can go out and do those projects.
Good explanation, Jason. Appreciate that. I do have one more question for you before shifting to John. This is a giant, pick all the qualifiers, 10 of them. It's massive, right? What inspired our leadership team and then maybe also our board of directors to take this on? Like it's a giant undertaking. Can you give a little? Sure, we've heard about the problem, we understand the problem, but to literally throw your hat in the ring and take it on, John. Like, Jason, can you explain some of the board and leadership conversations that led to actually saying, let's do this? Lucky Duck is a proud partner of Delta Waterfowl. While being an industry leader in waterfowl motion decoys is their focus, they have the hunter in mind when designing all of their products. From their 5-star crash-rated Lucky Duck kennel to their full line of predator hunting gear, they are committed to serving the hunter 365 days a year. Check out their wonderful line of products at www.luckyduck.com or at a local retailer near you.
I mean, I would point first to our history. This is what Delta does. I mean, through my time here, and I would say through any look into the history of Delta from its earliest beginnings, this is what we tend to do. We tend to look
Take
at
on
the
the
largest, most impossible problem
Yeah.
and then go deal with it because we understand that those are the problems that have the largest impact and effect on the duck hunting community. And I would couple with that, though, and in an effort truly to embarrass my friend and cohort here, but I really do believe this. If you look at what our policy team has accomplished over the last decade plus, it's pretty astonishing. And I think it's directly related to, we know exactly who we are. We know exactly who we serve, and that's North American duck hunters. And we understand what needs to be done. And so we stay on point. We focus on the things that matter to our constituents, which are duck hunters. And we just keep working at it. And we find consensus. We work with Democrats. We work with Republicans. None of that matters to us.
Mhm.
What matters is finding the solutions to what ducks and duck hunters need. And so I would say it's in part who we are. It's sort of built into our culture as an organization. But I would also point to a lot of the willingness, I would say, from the board and the rest of senior leadership really falls to this guy because we have been very successful and we feel like we can continue to be successful. And I think there's some momentum. If people are paying attention to the kinds of conversations the federal government has had, let's say through the recent reconciliation project they went through with the budget and everything else, is public lands came up as a topic. It was on
Lots of energy.
lots of energy around it. And so, and then coupled with that, the number of independent individuals or entities that I've talked to over the last year or so that are already trying to do things. They're working on things right now, whether that be a state level entity or just a group of concerned philanthropists. I recently recall talking to a guy who represented a few private individuals down in Mississippi, and they're focused on a very specific refuge that impacts their hunting. And they're working on it. They're talking to the managers, they're talking to different folks, and they're trying to come up with some solutions and find some things. So, again, I think a combination of the energy, who we are as an organization, this is the sort of thing we do, and then just the phenomenal success our team has had over the last few years. We just believe all those things point to this is exactly what we need to be focused on right now.
And I'll just sort of jump in. I mean, I think, Joel, you grew up in Wisconsin. I grew up in Minnesota. I think our experience around access is very different from the experience that most duck hunters have, right? And you were able to, slide a canoe into a creek or walk into a marsh on Forest Service land. In Wisconsin, I could launch a boat on big lakes in Minnesota. I guess I never even imagined growing up that access scarcity was a thing. Now, we didn't shoot many. We didn't necessarily shoot big numbers of ducks every day.
Right.
And if you look at the overwhelming majority of my time here at Delta, we've been focused on breeding ground issues, right? And we've been focused on, how do we deal with the impact of predation and the consequences for the fall flight? How do we deal with prairie wetlands? And listen, just to be clear with everybody, none of that's going away. This is all additive to that work.
Annual duck production is still the number one issue that drives the entire system.
That's right.
We know that, and we're not going to stop focusing on it. But I think the point John's making is something I agree with wholeheartedly. There are other issues starting to emerge that are outside the breeding grounds. And as an organization that calls itself the Duck Hunters Organization,
We have to be aware, conscious, and addressing it.
and do what we can.
I would say I think it's worth pointing out, like, John, you have built something amazing. If we go back, we're answering the call. Like, the work that you and the policy team do, that's answering a call. I remember, I don't know, John, 10, 15 years ago, everybody has a job, and it was not policy. It was not, responding to these, I've got a problem. But I remember it was like, oh my gosh, I'm stressed. I have 10 other things to do, but I got to answer. You were like,
Right.
John, I got this call. I got to answer it. And then it became, how are we going to do this? And we started directing like part-time resources towards it. And then all of a sudden, look at it. There's 6 people, probably growing. Like, the impact is amazing. So, thanks to the Duck Hunter at the same time for looking to Delta. We are the Duck Hunters Organization, and this is literally answering the call, responding, building a team, launching something like this. It's intimidating. It's exciting.
Yeah, but I think it's again, going back to Jason's sort of seminal point that we're the Duck Hunters Organization and we're going to do big, hard things. I think one of the things we've always prided ourselves on is answering the phone, and in it answering the email, and the volume and intensity around this issue specifically has gotten to the point where this isn't just because we're smart and we figured this out on our own. This is because we've been listening to duck hunters and saying this is a real problem and this is a real challenge and this is a real opportunity. I wouldn't have known about White Lake in southwest Louisiana if it wasn't for Brandon Broussard.
That's right.
Right? And you can go almost everywhere in the country. Whether we probably would have known about Klamath, but there's lots of places around the country that hunters have been having this experience, and I think what this is the culmination of that listening and understanding, and try to build strategies to help duck hunters where they live and where they hunt, and I'd make the argument help ducks a lot in the process because ultimately, duck habitat that's no good for duck hunters is no good to ducks either. So there's this sort of synergistic play here that I think we improve conditions for ducks at the same time we're creating high quality hunting opportunity for duck hunters.
Great. I think, John, maybe, and Jason, we should maybe pause a little bit. And you made a great point there. Where I grew up in Wisconsin, we had county forest, we had a lot of different government ownership than what we have here in North Dakota. So I think the listener, wherever you're from, and we actually do have overseas listeners as well, so shout out to you folks. I don't begin to know what access you have outside of your property or friend's property, but I guess it means something to everyone else. But I think when we're talking about duck hunting, we tend to be talking about federal lands, state lands. I suppose we can sprinkle in. We have a history with county lands and things like that, but the 2 biggest buckets are federal and state.
Yep.
So maybe we should try to describe these 2 systems of property. So maybe every listener can find a place in this discussion. So if we start at the federal side.
Yep.
We tend to have this big giant umbrella called the National Wildlife Refuge System, and I do think we tend to think of refuges. Right? And it's not just refuges, necessarily. Wouldn't waterfowl production areas fall into that system?
Yep.
So I have the benefit of staring at a piece of paper with some statistics already written down. There are 573 National Wildlife Refuges. This doesn't bring in the waterfowl production areas and things like that. Let's see, 95 million acres of land, 760 million acres of water. More than 300 of these refuges were acquired wholly or partially with federal duck stamp dollars, which that pot of money has raised more than $1.3 billion since 1934, and that's just insane. That's an insane amount of land. This does go back to trivia. When was what was we're going to do a little trivia here. If you get it wrong, I'll get it right. But when was the first National Wildlife Refuge created? When and where?
1934 in Florida.
Part 2 is right. 1903 in Florida.
In Florida.
Pelican Island National Wildlife
Pelican
Refuge.
Island.
It's kind of it was inspired by
The plume, by the plume killing.
absolutely.
Yep.
So the brown pelican.
Right.
And that's Theodore Roosevelt. This would all trace back to.
I wouldn't have known the dates, but I would have made a Teddy Roosevelt
Connection.
That's what I would have.
Yeah.
Yeah, but no, that's impressive. And more specifically to your point, the refuge system, for the most part, is duck hunter funded.
It's a duck hunter's asset.
We bought it. Every time we've bought a federal duck stamp, we've contributed to this particular asset, to the tune of over half of them being purchased by those dollars directly. And so if anyone should be interested, it's the constituents who paid for the asset, right? And
Absolutely.
so we're, from that perspective, this is why us as the Duck Hunters organization, we feel clearly the right organization to lead this effort, because that's who we represent, is duck stamp buyers and
Yeah.
purchasers.
Yeah. So, John, when we're talking about federal land, so we talked about refuges,
Yep.
actual refuges. What other types of property come to
mean,
mind?
Federal government owns, there's bureaus of Bureau of Land Management, there's National Forest Service,
National parks.
Part of the Fish and Wildlife Service is natural fish hatcheries, which we don't think of very often, but it actually is part of the hunt fish rule that we've been working on, we'll touch on later. There's been new hunting and hunting opportunities, duck hunting opportunities on national hatchery properties, sort of interestingly enough. But our real focus here, because, BLM, I want to talk about big chunks of land. BLM controls management of
Big chunks.
big
Tons,
chunks of land.
tons. Yeah.
Park Service, I don't know if most listeners would be aware of this, is actually considerably smaller than the land asset, the refuge system. But for the purposes of this conversation, we're really focused on the National Wildlife Refuge System because it has statutory requirements. And again, as you pointed out, the funding linkage specifically to migratory birds and really to ducks and geese in most instances. So that's where we're focusing most of our energy when we're talking about federal lands.
Okay. And then for the federal system, John, who's the governing body?
Fish and Wildlife Service.
So the U.S. Fish and Wildlife
U.S.
Service.
Fish and Wildlife Service. And,
Right.
and if you go back in time, way back in time, the two things that the Fish and Wildlife Service really spent a lot of time on, it was a refuge system and it was migratory birds. There's a few of us old dinosaurs around here that would love that to be the two highest priorities of the service today. The challenge, much like we deal with in other agencies, is over time, and as constituents push and pull at these agencies, they get broader. But I think the argument we're hoping to make with the current administration and Congress is, while all those other priorities, is a comment that Jason made kind of in the press release when we announced Restore Our Refuges, those are all really important values for the American public, whether we're talking about ecosystem services, endangered species, all the rest of that's really important. It shouldn't come at the expense of what the service has always done extraordinarily well, which is manage migratory birds and manage national wildlife refuges. And we just want those two programs within the service to get the kind of profile recognition and resources that we need them to have, so that they can fulfill their mission. Because I think the concern, we'll get into it in greater detail, is they can't, at the current levels of funding, staffing, and with problems with infrastructure, we're concerned that the future of those assets is significantly degraded.
Okay. Yeah, one of the things, too, I think a little more trivia here, so if the first refuge was established in 1903 and the federal duck stamp came in 1934, it kind of begs the question. We kind of looked at it. Over half of the National Wildlife Refuge system was purchased with duck hunter dollars, but not all of it. So somewhere, kind of begs the question: where did the rest of it come from? And so there, those early years were federally appropriated funds. I suppose general funds. I'm guessing. I don't 100% know. Also, there are refuges out there that were donated properties from private individuals, from NGOs who may have owned land. And then I was kind of surprised as well, not know if I was surprised, but other federal agencies transferring land to the federal government, to the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service to establish and manage a refuge.
Yeah.
Right.
So that's kind of interesting. Let's move over. I guess I should back up. Waterfowl production areas.
Yeah.
Refuges that are owned by the federal government. Then there's also fee title, or easement refuges. I'm sorry. There's
Right.
easement refuges. I don't know a lot about those. Do you?
There's not a lot of easement refuges out there. The one that I'm sort of most familiar with is, hell, I've probably taken you pheasant hunting down there, which is Sunburst, down along 1804 here, about an hour south of Bismarck. There's a small easement refuge there. There's a few of them in North Dakota. I think there's a couple scattered around. I heard of one in Mississippi that I wasn't terribly familiar with, but that's a pretty small fraction of the asset. Most of them are what we expect to see when we see a refuge, which is the big blue goose sign and all the rest of that.
Okay. So like using an analogy, most of the refuge system is a purebred dog, but there's a few mixed breeds out there, easement
Exactly.
refuges,
Yep.
things like that.
Yep.
And the WPAs, which are focused on production, and Minnesota, North and South Dakota, or
Wisconsin
has WPAs as well.
Minnesota, Iowa, the two Dakotas, Wisconsin, and I think there's a few in Montana.
I bet you there is. Yeah, I love those WPAs.
Yeah.
Being a duck production guy, I love them. Yeah, it's awesome. Now we have not talked about the state properties that hunters rely on for for hunting access. I always refer to them as wildlife management areas, WMAs. The nomenclature may change in other
From
jurisdictions.
state to state. Yeah.
But generally, we're looking at state lands, and I suppose it's probably, John, is it an impossibility to describe that infrastructure of property in terms of source of funding, mandates?
I mean, overwhelming majority of it is coming from licensed dollars and Pittman Robertson. Those are the two primary funding sources for state agencies.
Okay.
So, I mean, I'd love to have Kurt Thiede from AFWA or somebody from AFWA sitting here to correct me, but I'd imagine that the overwhelming majority of those properties have been purchased with licensed dollars from licensed hunters in the state, and then also matched with Pittman Robertson. Almost all those signs on WMAs will make the connection to PR.
And just to point out again that connection, Pittman Robertson dollars are created as by an excise tax on ammunitions and firearms that we hunters buy.
And hunting equipment, yeah,
So-
decoys, and yeah.
Yeah, so the stuff we buy, and Pittman Robertson's been around for a long time, since early 1900s, 18, I think, somewhere.
1900, yeah,
somewhere in
way
there.
back.
And so, again, you have hunters participating on the gear and equipment side. You have hunters participating with stamps. You have hunters participating when they buy licenses. So much of this system, the overwhelming part of this system, has been directly paid for by waterfowlers. And again, I think that's an important point. As the Duck Hunters organization, this seems like exactly the right place for us to be concerned and to put our energy. This is who supports us. They've paid for these places, and a lot of these places are facing challenges. And again, we don't want to be, it's very careful, we're not judgmental to managers and everybody else.
Yeah,
This is
absolutely.
not some organized effort by any single entity. This is just the sort of thing that happens over long periods of time. Priorities shift over time, budgets shift over time. Different administrations come and go at both the state and federal level. I think a lot of us, John, you can actually speak to this. I mean, John did a lot of the heavy lifting with some other partners and some other conservation groups to develop all of this data that we now have about the state of these public lands. But John, I mean, how shocked were you as you guys delve deeper and deeper into this issue? We're all sitting here paying attention generally to this issue, but I think all of our assumptions were the refuge system's fine. It's just there. It's doing what it's supposed to be doing. I've had lots of experiences with duck hunters out in the public where it's the first thing they want to do with me is I land and I go see them and I get in the car and the first thing to do is take to their public duck hunting area. And a lot of times, unfortunately, it's to show me what disrepair it's in, right? Like, look, they're not flooding that anymore. They used to flood that or whatever. So, but John, I'd be interested from your perspective, how enlightening was that as you guys continue to sort of open up this can of worms, and the worms kept coming out.
Yeah, well, I mean, it started during COVID. We talked about this when you and Cyrus and I were on. It started COVID because we got an inkling that we may have a political pathway to achieve an outcome here. But we figured, we're a bunch of science geeks, right? So we spent a lot of time wanting to prove and validate and everything else. So we did this big data dive, and as I told you back in July, that was Ed Penny at Ducks Unlimited and myself that sat down and did that. Ed through his channels at DU, my through ours here at Delta. And yeah, when we aggregated those lists, the lists were different. And there was a lot of overlap, but probably about 20% on either side was information that he had that I didn't, and vice versa. But when we aggregate that list and you start running your cursor, I'm really bad at Excel, which everybody here at this table knows is pretty bad at it. But when you drag down and you sum it, you get to that big number at the bottom. It was a holy crap moment. And the first exercise was to summarize the federal stuff, and we came up with a list of over $250 million. And I'm like, wow, that's a lot of money. Well, then in parallel to the effort on the federal side, we looked at the state assets, and that was over $605 million. And that's a bigger number, obviously, and that was through a pretty narrow lens. That was a lens that said priority waterfowl or wetland refuges or WMAs on waterfowl and wetland infrastructure. So this isn't talking about the roads that washed out. This isn't talking about the roof falling in at the visitor center, the bathrooms not working. This was a fairly small peak. And yeah, you kind of go, well, how do we deal with the $250 million? Or if you take the big bite, the Fish and Wildlife Service refuge system, $2.6 billion problem. I don't have a lot of answers for $2.6 billion problems.
So just to be clear, there's a B on the front of that one? B as in
$2.6 billion is the Fish and Wildlife Service current estimate on infrastructure needs refuge system-wide.
Rig'em is an industry leader in high-quality waterfowl gear and proud partner of Delta Waterfowl. From blind bags, backpacks, and gun cases to dog vests, dog stands, and dog blinds, Rig'em has you and your hunting dog covered for long days in the duck marsh. And even more exciting, Rig'em has launched its new mainline series decoys that are lightweight, durable, and they look awesome. Check out Rig'em complete lineup at www.rig'emright.com or wherever you buy your hunting gear.
Yeah.
$250 million, big amount, feels... Have you guys ever done that? If you take 1,000 seconds, 1,000,000 seconds, 1,000,000,000 seconds, something like that.
I can't do that much math.
You go from like a few hours to like a week and a half to like 30, 50 years. It's insane. So billion, that's a lot of...
$2.6 billion.
That's a lot.
Overarching need.
That's a lot. Hey, I think there's one thing I'd like to back up a little bit here. We're all a product of our own environment. So where I have lived, I don't know that I've actually hunted on a refuge, right? I did my master's research on Lake Alice National Wildlife Refuge in north central North Dakota. I never hunted it. I've hunted a lot of WPAs, right?
Yep.
Lots. But when we started talking about this, I thought, I don't equate the refuges with hunting, right? I think a lot of people think of it as a refuge.
Right.
Now, I did a little bit of research, and I was interesting to find that the refuges, the mandate isn't hunting. It's conservation first, and then it's compatible use, which includes hunting, fishing, and other recreational opportunities. So if hunting is compatible with the conservation first, then you hunt.
Right.
But it's interesting. Jason, well-traveled in terms of where you've lived. John and I have lived in the north our whole life, but then both well-traveled hunters. What is the typical duck hunter in the United States? How do they identify refuges? Is it hunting or rest?
That's a tough question, but I will say I think it's exactly the way you identified it in your mind, which is I think most duck hunters hear the word or think the word refuge and they think not accessible for me to go hunt on. It's the place where the ducks go that I can't get to them. I think generally is how most duck hunters think about it. Now that's not always the case. there are a lot of guys, especially across the South, that I know that's where they hunt, right? And so you get these weird lines in the water that you're just supposed to know. They're signs, you can't go across that line or whatever. So yeah, my personal experience was a little bit mix of both. Like just anecdotally, for Thanksgiving, I was able to go back to where my family has hunted in South Arkansas this past week. It just so happens that particular deer camp, which is a deer camp, not a duck camp, but that deer camp is only about 10 miles from parts of Felsenthal. Now, from what I could hear in the deer woods, things are really good at Felsenthal right now. I don't know that to be a fact. I can't say what the harvest was, but I can say the attempts on harvest were
quite high.
Were robust.
There were a lot of excise taxes being generated.
But you got the upper Ouachita and places like that. But yeah, I think most duck hunters think of it that way, but it's really interesting. This makes me think about Dr. Cohen's work that just came out and what the importance of refuge and sanctuary is to migrating waterfowl and how they respond to human disturbance, especially during the winter, even versus during the spring. And again, we've talked about this within this organization since I've been here, and that is this issue of pressure, and we don't understand it. And I think we've seen the outcomes of a lot of pressure, but it at a local level, it's very hard to experience. And the way I tend to hear it most commonly is, it might be something like, as an example, because I don't want anybody to call me about this, but we need to extend duck hunting into February because I went down to my refuge and it was covered up with ducks, right? Or I went to the WMA, it was covered up with ducks. And I generally try to offer this alternative version of, well, it could be that no shotguns have gone off in 3 weeks.
Yeah.
And maybe that's why you're seeing ducks.
4 days.
Or 4 days even.
Right.
Or what, So again, I think we understand from waterfowl management standpoint how important it is these birds have sanctuary, they have refuges, they have places to go, because it's part of what tends to seem to keep them in the area. They have places that they can move around. But I would also say pressure is a topic we don't really understand either, except in a sort of coarse COARSE way. That generally, bang, bang, some go home with you, some go away, and maybe they're smarter.
They don't turn around and come back.
Not generally. I mean, we're next to it sometimes, but whatever. A few dumb ducks. But point being is we just understand that refuge as a concept is important to migrating birds, and I think most duck hunters think of that word in the same way they think of the place in the same way they think of the word. But again, I don't know if that's completely true, because I know a lot of people that they completely depend on those public lands for all of their hunting opportunities.
Right. Yeah. One backup. I like to refer people to prior podcast episodes, and so the one with Dr. Cohen that I was able to do, we talked about his research focused on the value of sanctuary habitat. If a duck is going to find a place where it is not being disturbed, it's not a question, it's an answer. They will find somewhere. And if there is not sanctuary habitat in your hunting area, they will leave.
Right.
And he said it's those rest areas that you're like, oh, they're all over there. They need that. That is what is allowing you to have ducks in your area. So they're very important in terms of, I think, quality hunting. And maybe I answered this question, but I think we think of refuges. Now we're bringing into the conversation a refuge, a good place for people to hunt, or it used to be. We want it to be again. Yep. But there's a lot of private landowners, private clubs, leases all throughout the South. Those refuges are, John, those rest areas, at the very least, those rest areas must be important for those individuals as well.
Yeah, I mean, when we're talking about White Lake, going back to, the conversations, Brandon Broussard, one of our greatest ever volunteers, longtime state chairman from Louisiana. Brandon didn't hunt on White Lake. Mm-hmm. He hunted 4 miles away. But what he saw was that once White Lake had become degraded, it collapsed the entire sort of duck aggregation in that universe. And I think, whether we're the value of the high quality habitat, the value of the sanctuary, is contributing to a pretty significant zone of influence around those places that is helping lots of people's hunting. Now, we've heard for a long time that, well, we should open them all up or we should rotate we've heard all that stuff for a long time.
Right.
And I get it. If you haven't shot a duck in 3 days and you drive by and look over the levee, and the Molsey unit is the one I used to hear about in Louisiana all the time, and there's 20,000 mallards sitting there with their butts up in the air or their heads under their wing, you get a little grouchy about it. But the reality is, if you don't have that, it's going to be, things are going to get pretty scarce pretty quick.
They will find some other place. And it's a very weird and almost difficult answer to give, but a lot of times I will get that question, as I know the rest of us do, is where are the ducks? And the response is not where you've been shooting at them.
Yeah.
For certain. They're going somewhere where they can get refuge and they can get sanctuary, and that is evident in the research data at this point, the literature. It's just evident. And so, again, a system that was set up to provide conservation for migrating birds, which is a refuge system, is there for that purpose. If it's degraded, it's our belief that that is degrading that area of influence around it. And I think if you look at a lot of duck clubs, like look at the placement of duck clubs, right? I think if you looked on a map, you're going to find the correlation to the places we're talking about. Because why wouldn't you set up your duck club there? Like, why, if the feds say this is where the ducks are migrating through and they're at this refuge, then of course I'd love to have my duck club right on the line, right? Like I want to be right there because that's going to be the best opportunity, at least theoretically. And so we believe that's been contributing to the changes in the types, not the types of phone calls, it's the folks calling.
Yeah.
Right. And again, it's a point we made way back in the duck distribution podcast was we saw a shift in the people that were calling. And again, when times are tough, when spring production is down, it's quite common, especially in the Deep South, we get a phone call from people because it's tough. It's challenging down there. You have those down years and it's hard and it's frustrating. You go multiple days and you don't see a duck. But when we know people have been spending gobs and gobs of money on habitat privately to try to make sure that they've done everything they can, and they're not seeing any ducks as well, something is shifting. Again, we're not exactly sure what the shift is and exactly what's causing it. We think there's 5 contributing factors. We want to study those more scientifically. We want to better understand that. But for now, there's at least an opportunity, it appears, and we at least appear to be the right organization to take advantage of the opportunity and the energy around improving these public lands, and for us specifically for waterfowl and waterfowling.
Okay. If you've listened to this podcast enough times, you've learned that I'm a bucket guy and I'm a funnel guy, and I think of these podcast conversations as funnels, right? And so dumping information in. So I'm going to say to the listener, what's coming out the bottom of the funnel is what's going to be a solution-oriented discussion, right? Bring me a problem, bring me 2 solutions. Well, we're going to do that, but I have one more, I'd say, background conversation that I think is important before we come out the other end of the funnel, and that's one is maybe the magnitude. You spelled it out in dollars, but John, let's go back. When were the and maybe try if possible, don't if you can't, federal lands, state lands. Was there ever a heyday for this system in terms of infrastructure management and staffing?
Yeah, I would imagine, come out of, sort of World War II. We come back from World War II. The economy's growing. People have more free time. People, it's the baby boom that you've talked about so much, Joel, in terms of hunter recruitment and high participation. We were buying WMAs. We were buying National Wildlife Refuges. We were very intensively managing habitat. We were putting all this infrastructure in. So I suppose, let's say from the 50s through the early 90s.
Okay.
Where I think, again, I wasn't alive during a pretty goodly chunk of that. So I'm making some assumptions.
Yeah.
The other thing that I think is sort of interesting, so I think that's the heyday. And if you go back, as Jason pointed out, look at concentrations of duck clubs, it didn't take the duck hunters long to figure out where those places were. They were well managed, which meant there were ducks right over the fence, and it's going to be good for me. here's one of the things that I think is a seismic change. We talked a little bit about it during the duck distribution podcast, Joel, is we've gone through this shift where it used to be during the Gilded Age, whenever the end date was the Gilded Age, the public lands were the gold standard for management.
Mm-hmm.
Our refuges and our WMAs were the best of the best. We had infrastructure that worked. We had pumps and levees and water control structures. We had robust staff complements. We were disking moist soil. We were doing all those things. And at that time, there were private duck clubs, but not at the magnitude there are today.
Yeah,
Right?
I would say even more, certainly not at the levels of specific management either.
Right.
I think there was clubs of, here's a spot, there's some woods, it floods in the fall, in the winter, and there's ducks in there. We're going to go hunt those ducks. But I agree, John. I think, public, for my entire lifetime in the South, the idea of great high quality hunting on public lands, I would say, has not really been the case. It's been more of, you probably want to get on a lease with multiple people, and you're going to be generally in an area where ducks tend to come through, but you're probably going to be in the same blind every day. So we got real good at cooking biscuits and, making bacon in the blind and doing all that sort of stuff. But again, it is a bit of a mixed bag too, right? Because I still know a lot of guys that go out and stand in the pour lines and see if they get a ticket and that sort of stuff for public lands all over the Midwest. But I don't remember that shift. The shift that I recall was more. There were still deer hunting properties that were privately owned, like timber companies or paper mill companies. I remember some of that being available when I was very young, that you could just sort of access. But for really my lifespan in the South, it was either purely public or you were part of a lease or you owned property. The one thing I can for sure say that I have seen, and this has been especially over my time with Delta, is the level of management that is happening on those private duck clubs. One thing for certain that I've seen change since maybe say the early 90s through today is refuge areas on private duck clubs. That is a new thing, and new in the historical sense.
People are creating their own sanctuary habitat.
Imagine that.
I mean, look, if it works for the birds and it works for the feds, why wouldn't it work for me?
Right, and I do it too.
And I think it's smart. I think it's good conservation. But again, I think it's part of overall what we're talking about. And I think what you were going to reference was it's this thing that's been happening simultaneously. Private lands management has gotten better. And public lands exponentially better, and public lands management has gotten worse, and it's been happening at the same time.
Yeah,
and I don't know that they're even that related. That's just what
I don't think they are related.
They're just what's been happening.
Yeah,
right. Like good conservationists, we know lots of them across the South that put their money where their mouth is. Got a great friend in Arkansas. He is one of the finest men I know, and he manages a lot of private property for the benefit of ducks. He also hunts them there. Right, and he's a great human being. I think his intention has always been to be helpful to waterfowl species and to be a good conservationist.
Yeah,
and you know what? He doesn't have any water control structures that don't work, and he never has a breached levee.
I think he knows.
He's never out of diesel.
I bet he knows when a thimble of water comes onto that property and a thimble goes off.
You guys have created a great segue to go further down the funnel. So the setup here, John, I'm going to ask you. After I give you some setup figures, I'm going to ask you, when a duck hunter, a dissatisfied duck hunter, goes to a public hunting area and sees and finds something that they're unhappy with, that's not being taken care of, this is a setup, and I want you to describe maybe a short list of things that hunters are calling and saying, this is bad, this didn't happen. So here is the setup, and this is the National Wildlife Refuge system. Since the year 2010, they've had a budget decrease in 35%. I doubt the land mass has gotten any smaller.
It's gotten bigger.
Bigger.
And since 2011, they've lost 711 full-time staff. I doubt the work has gotten any less. That's a 29% reduction in workforce.
Right.
So there's the setup. So I'm a duck hunter. I'm in the south. I went to a hunting location. I'm upset. I call John Devney and I say, this used to happen. It's not. What are they finding at these locations?
Well, let's imagine a place in Arkansas, Tennessee, Kentucky, Missouri, that kind of latitude. I think, all things being equal, we'd love that to be in high functioning moist soil management.
Mhm.
There's lots of places for ducks to eat corn or rice or soybeans. And Lee Frederickson tells us this going back a jillion years, right, about the value of moist soil. It's way valuable to ducks. Plus, it's the kind of habitat we've lost the most of in that part of the world.
Right.
It just doesn't exist like it used to. And the reason it's valuable is because there's really good intensive moist soil. You have this huge breadth of plants from little itty bitty seeds to bigger seeds. Plus, you get this big sort of crush of invertebrates. So you got lots of groceries on a per acre basis. So let's go back and imagine in 1976, the first time somebody hunted there. They went out there and it was, man, they got it right. What the duck hunter didn't see is what was happening in April, in May, June, July, and August, and September to create that robust stand of moist soil. So what you need to do if you want good moist soil, and believe me, there's 1,000 people better to describe this than John Devney, I can assure you of that. But in simple terms, you got to get the water off it after the ducks leave. Okay, then it sits up for a little bit. And if you're in late stage succession, you're going to want to run a disc through it to keep early succession plants. Then you're going to hit it with irrigation. And then you're going to hit it with irrigation till about June 1st, and then you're going to drop the water off of it. Then you may flush another set of irrigation on it in August, and then flush it off, and then you're going to fill it for the opening day of duck season in the 14th of November. Okay? So that was the experience. That was the management. That's what we were doing on that refuge in 1976 or 1986 or whenever the hell the Gilded Age was. Okay? Now the experience is that refuge went from having 20 people and the staff to a guy is a biologist, guy or gal, who is now serving 5 refuges as part of a complex. Guess what's not happening? We're not doing the irrigation in April. We're not doing the disking. We're not doing the flush in June. So guess what happens? It grows up into a bunch of crap that is not highly valuable like the stuff we were getting when we were intensively managing. We aren't getting swamp timothy. We're not getting wild millet. We got cockleburs and willow trees. And so I think that is, but the thing about it is, the reason for that is not because, as Jason, I think, did a nice job pointing out earlier, is because somebody set out to screw it up, right? Or to, I'm going to show these duck hunters, we're going to give them crummy habitat. The reality is, if you want to manage moist soil like that, you have to be able to move water at very specific times, which means you have to have pumps at work, water control structures at work.
Access to the water.
And access to the water. All of that.
And a person to move the
to
hose
do
and
it.
flip the switch.
So
right?
we've got, what did we say earlier? We got $250 million of deferred maintenance. That's the stuff we use to move water. And then you pointed out we have 711 fewer people. That's less people to turn the pumps on, disc this. So that, I think, sort of characterizes the nature of it. And people can imagine for where they live and the kind of habitat they have. But that's the challenge with managing for ducks and duck hunting, is it's more intensive than having good habitat for white-tailed deer. And I recognize I'm always disparaging about white-tailed deer, but I mean, white-tailed deer do pretty damn good in a lot of places. They don't need somebody micromanaging, disking, and putting water on and off at the optimal time to get the kind of habitat quality we need for ducks.
Yeah, I think so. There's the stark problem, like this area for the last 30 years has been managed, flooded, and pumped the water off and all that obvious. Now there's no water and it's duck season, right? So there's
Right.
it can be that stark, but then there's the blind that was open to the public that is now has rotten floorboards or washed away. There's trails and roads and
The
boat
levees are
ramps
washed out. Yeah.
and a lot of this, John, on that episode 70 that we keep reminding people to go back to, we really took the time to say, rather than bash that public land manager when you go to that location, give him a hug.
Yeah, he's your friend, and he's
Yeah.
doing the best he can with what he's got.
Yeah.
This is my personal professional experience. When I came to Delta, one of the earliest things I heard was Delta, gave me the opportunity to travel to places like North South Carolina, Michigan, Ohio. Just go meet duck hunters, go talk to them. And this has been an issue for a lot of these public places. A duck hunter immediately wants to take me there. We want to look at it. We want to talk about it. And so that led me to, okay, well, maybe part of the challenge is if we imagine in the 20th century when hunting was healthier than it is today in terms of the number of people hunting, the amount of money in the system. Again, a lot of the system, the North American model, has always been set up on hunters pay to play. That's how we do it. So you get this decline in hunting, you get a decline in revenue. That's just a fact that we're dealing with. So maybe there was a time, imagine, the Gilded Age, as you pointed out, where things were so good that maybe we just didn't need to talk to each other the way we might need today. Maybe the hunter just go to the public lands and enjoy the sport. The enforcement officer was out there doing their job, and the manager was out there running tractors and moving pumps and whatever. What I found was a lot of these folks, in a lot of cases, haven't talked to each other. Now, I think that's changing, and we can get into that further especially what our chapters are doing. More and more I go out and spend time with our chapters, and they immediately introduce me to their local WMA manager, whatever. They're working with these people, which is brilliant. But maybe let's imagine we went through that time period where we weren't communicating the way we could have, simply because we didn't need to. Things were pretty good. Everybody was pretty happy. That sort of fits the good old days narrative, which we hear a lot in duck hunting, of course. But my experience was, okay, well, I'm paid by Delta to represent these guys, to work with them, to do fundraising and whatever. And so I'll just get up and go talk to that guy, this alleged manager, this evil whatever who's not doing whatever
What I
need him to do, right?
Yeah.
And I drive out there, and I want to stop short of attribution because I would never want anybody to get in trouble. But you drive out there, and there's a building that has 12 offices in it, and one of them has the lights on, and the rest of them have old desks and chairs stored in them. And you walk in, and immediately that person looks at you like, oh, God, I hope you're not here to fire me today. Because these other 11 offices have been emptied out one at a time over time, and I'm the last person in this building. I'll give you another example. You were talking about the blinds that are made available that used to be well kept and well taken care of. Our chapter wanted to work with a refuge complex out around San Francisco, I believe, not far out of San Francisco. And the refuge manager and their supervisor up the chain were so impressed with this that they wanted to have a meeting. So we're going to have a Zoom meeting. We're going to talk to these people. And first off, this manager was so proud to have our chapters. Please, this is so wonderful. This is the best thing ever. And our chapters were contributing to fix up 2 blinds. One was a handicap and one was just a regular blind, as I recall. And I remember this refuge manager said, this is great, but I have 41 of these. Can you help me? And I went, well, 41's a lot more than 2.
One at a time.
So no, I think it's very important that we remember that the managers are our partners, and most of these people got into these roles specifically to do what we expected they were doing, which is keep these places maintained, keep them in good order, keep a good place for the wildlife. They simply just don't have the money and they don't have the staff, and they're just trying to hold it together. I mean, we talk to them constantly. Yeah, I know. You think they don't know which pumps aren't working? They know which pumps aren't working. Yeah. They don't have any money to fix them. They don't have any money to replace them.
They don't have any money to put diesel in them.
And
well,
that's what they're facing.
Let's come out of the funnel now, and I guess thank you for all the sausage making. I think that's really important to understand the solutions. But it really comes down to, I think the listeners going, yeah, I know all these problems. Not every listener, but for a lot of people are nodding their heads. But what's maybe less obvious are the solutions.
Yep.
Policy advocacy and chapters, are those 2 buckets? You kind of.
I think so.
I think so.
Yeah.
I think so.
Which one of you guys wants to talk about the policy side Would that be?
I'll take the policy side and let Jason. Jason's had a great experience working very closely with our volunteers, and I think he captured that better than I could. Yeah, I think so. So we've talked ad nauseum now about the problem.
Mhm.
So we need a few things when it comes to the Fish and Wildlife Service refuge system. We need a significant investment in infrastructure to address that, either depending on what lens you want to look at it through, the $250 million problem or the $2.6 billion problem. Candidly, I'll be real honest with everybody and all of our listeners. I got to spend my time focused on the $250 million problem.
I would pick that one too.
Yeah, the waterfowl. Yeah, well, in the waterfowl and wetlands piece, just because if there's somebody here who's a great advocate for crushed rock and bathrooms, that's awesome. I'm happy you're out there, but I got to focus what's most impactful to us in our membership. And I think we've got legislation that's been introduced in the Senate by Senator Daines, Senator King. We're working with leadership in the House right now to do the same in the House, to create, again, that investment, to supercharge investment in that infrastructure. So that I think is probably one of the most important things. The other thing is these agencies, whether we're talking about the Park Service, BLM, or the Forest Service, have used this contracting good neighbor authority to do their work for a long time. The Fish and Wildlife Service, it's less clear that they have the authority. Now, they have the authority to have our friends at Ducks Unlimited or California Waterfowl Association come in and fix the levees and water control structures, and that's happening through NACA and everything else. But in terms of the management piece, it's not been super well utilized. So the conversation we're having right now is both with the Fish and Wildlife Service leadership and also with the House and Senate to make sure that the service can access sort of outside private-public partnership experts. Because, whether we're talking about, the management of marsh and impoundments in Maryland or Virginia, or we're talking about, stuff in the Mississippi Alluvial Valley or the Louisiana coast or the Central Valley of California, there's a lot of, I don't think this kind of going back to that Gilded Age phenomenon, I don't think this expertise existed 40 years ago in the private sector. It was all in the public sector. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of people that are good at managing habitat across the country. And if I will be bold enough to say that we're not hiring 711 more refuge staff back that we've lost since 2010. Right. I think Republican or Democrat, you mentioned it, Jason mentioned it earlier, this is not a Republican or a Democrat issue. The line is solid down through all administrations. So I don't think anybody is going to say, golly gee whiz, we need to get 711 more federal employees back. I think that's pretty low. So how do we harness that person that's a great manager that could do that work on refuges? So get the infrastructure taken care of through legislation that's introduced in the Senate, will be introduced in the House, work with the administration and Congress to create this stewardship authority to use partners. And then, ultimately, we need to turn the tide on the operations side of the Fish and Wildlife Service refuge budget, where we recognize that it takes money to manage habitat at high quality. And that means people, that means diesel, that means tractors, and that takes money. And so that's, again, focus on the administration in the president's budget, and then it's working with Congress to increase appropriations. So I think those are the three sort of big buckets.
And I'll bring up one more topic, and reserve this for me to bring up. Wouldn't expect John to really dig into this, but there's another issue baked into all this, and I'm not going to suggest this is the primary issue. I'm not trying to give bait to any federal government conspiracy theorists as might be in the world about what they might or might not be up to. But there have also been instances that we're aware of, let's say in the last decade or 15 years, where we know that dollars that might have been appropriated, earmarked, put into a budget to do X thing for wildlife management have been redirected to other things. We know that to be a fact. And so we can't say for certain that the dollars the refuge system have not received are because of that specifically. All I'm saying is that we know that's happened. And that's another issue that we need to bring to light, and we need to discuss, and we need to support the managers and our agency partners on that issue, because that's done by order. That's something that comes down from way, way above them. They don't have an option. They don't get a choice in this. They just get a letter, and it says you're going to do it this way, and this is what's going to happen. And they sort of have to deal with it. And so that's another thing, as the organization who's charged with the mission of securing the future of waterfowling, we have to be mindful of. We have to watch out for that. That is something that happens. And so I think that needs to be included, though. I just don't want to leave that off the table. As there's been declines in the budget. There's budgets that go down, but then there's also budgets that don't go up or declines, right? We have this issue of inflation and other issues, right? Things cost more today. And so if you don't increase a budget, well, guess what?
You're essentially reducing it.
You've reduced it. And so it's a combination of things. It's also a combination of what I would say are some unfair practices by people who have made decisions that have nothing to do with the things that we're interested in, and we need to be vigilant for that too. But yeah, John's right. We need an immediate injection of capital to deal with the issues right now, to supercharge that process. We need those managers to have the ability to work with other expertise, private expertise, especially on the management side. Because again, I can give you a story. I can tell you about hunting a property. I was blessed enough to get on a really good lease once in Texas, and we were going to do some moso management. There were 4 of us with duck hunters. You know what we knew about moso management? Nothing. But we got out there and we tried to hand sew stuff, and we had no idea what we were doing. So there is a real expertise to managing waterfowl habitat that we need to acknowledge. And as John points out, I know a lot of those folks that moved into the private sector years and years ago. There's a lot more opportunity there. They can make more money. They have a lot more control over the property as the property manager. And so there's expertise available. We need to get the managers access to that. We need to get them short-term injection to deal with these big problems that they're dealing with. But I think also, as John pointed out, long-term, we need the trend to start going back upwards. It needs to start back the other direction. It has been steadily doing this for a long time due to inattention, due to just the challenges of the federal government. It's a big machine, right? And it takes a lot of humanity to run it. And when you cut your staff that deep, this is what happens. This is the challenge you have. So,
yeah.
At the Fed level, I think those are the answers, and they seem clear to me. And not only clear to me, but I want to say doable. They also seem doable to me. Not only because they're simple in a sense, because it's evident if you take this step in this direction, then it's going to start moving the right way, but because there is some inertia in the system right now. There's some real momentum across the system, at the agency level, at the private philanthropic level, at the nonprofit organizational level. Everyone seems very, very interested. You asked me a question about our board. I want to give them a lot of credit. We actually brought this to their attention last February. That's when we really put this up in front of them and all the data that John and Ed and other folks had collected. And I wouldn't say I was shocked, but I was certainly proud at the amount of energy that immediately emerged from our board of directors. All of them were immediately engaged on this issue and said, yes, this is an important issue. We need to do everything we can to address it.
I think the last topic of the solutions before we wrap up for the day, I think it's time to bring in, what we'd all call the crown jewel of Delta, and that's our event system.
Yep.
John, you had mentioned that there are locations in Louisiana. I think you talked about White Lake, and you wouldn't have thought about that if it wasn't for Brandon.
Yep.
Brandon, a prominent volunteer chapter member of Delta. Wow, we love our chapters. We love the work that they do. What is it, 400 chapters-ish, something like that? Yeah. You've listeners heard us refer to, or if you're part of a chapter, it's I call it a profit-sharing model, Waterfowl Heritage Fund. Chapters get to spend, a percentage of their funds raised for Delta on an annual basis on local work, nest structures, shooting teams, hunter recruitment work. Public hunting area improvement projects are one of them. And part of this Restoring Our Refuges is highlighting 2 chapters that, hey, if you haven't been, and underline in bold, if you're interested, we'd love to see you partnering with your local state or federal land manager and help them with whatever money you have. It's not going to solely fund the problem, but partner and lend a hand. Grab a bucket and start bailing out that boat. Jason, you cut your teeth with Delta. You came to Delta through the events system. You want to talk just a little bit about the role that chapters are going to play on top of what I just described?
Yeah, absolutely. I would start by sort of where the thinking starts, and that is all you have to do is go to YouTube and type in opening day, pick your poison, any public place.
Mainly Arkansas.
Arkansas is a really good one for it. If you want to understand how passionate duck hunters are, go look at a video of many places on their opening day. I have brought this up 1,000 times. It is just stuck in my brain. I saw a video of some guys on horses in a swamp. Right? I grew up in Louisiana. We call them swamps. We little P-row boats. We paddle around, and these guys are on horses. I'm getting to that spot, and I'm beating all you guys at that spot. So, I've always come from the standpoint, the perspective that there is no more passionate, I think, conservationist hunter on the planet than a duck hunter.
Right.
As John pointed out, just the sheer management that it requires to have good duck habitat is one facet of it. But I mean, you're talking about these are people who day in and day out for multiple days in a row will get up at 4 o'clock in the morning, put a wet, smelly dog in a truck, hook up a boat that may or may not have bearings that are about to go out on the trailer, drive an hour through whitetail infested back roads to launch a boat in the dark, to drive further in the dark just to get an opportunity to hunt some birds. And so I think it was fairly astute of those of our forefathers that set up our system the way it did to take advantage of that passion and that energy. And I think it's been one of the great strengths of Delta is that we have put our chapters in a position to participate, to be part of everything we're doing. I think it's a smart acknowledgement, too, that unfortunately conservation can at times constrict and constrain itself in ways that it maybe didn't intend to, but it did. And if you see organizations that try to run everything through them, I think what you end up happening is you create a weird bottleneck that's very hard. And recruitment's a place that stands out for us, right? Part of the reason we love our chapter system is they represent the lion's share of the hunter recruitment this organization does. It's because if you and I and John tried to go recruit all the duck hunters we needed,
Not enough of them.
we'd be long dead before, and we wouldn't even get close.
We'd have 20 at the end of the year.
Whereas you activate your volunteer network, your volunteer system, and these folks go out and they do it day in and day out, and they do it great. They do it fantastic. They're so passionate. They put all their energy and their life's blood in it. So yeah, it's exciting for me when I think about it, because these chapter folks, these volunteers, are also the folks that are hunting those areas. Mm-hmm. They know full well that boat launch is broke because they have to back their boat over it 5 times a year or 10 times a year. And so, yeah, I'm very excited about that portion of it because, again, I think not only do they bring the energy and the passion to go get things done, but they also bring the knowledge, the know-how in a lot of cases. They know the manager, and so, yeah, I think we couple that together with their ability to choose how some of the dollars they raise are spent. Yeah, I think you're activating something very powerful in my mind.
I think what we're going to see, and this is what we've seen time and time and time again, is, and something you've understood implicitly, Joel, here is the guy that manages WHF is having this nexus with the policy team too, because let's be honest, if every one of our chapters spent every one of our dollars on this problem, it wouldn't go very far.
We don't have $605 million, John.
Yeah, and 235 or 2.6 billion. So, but the thing about it is recognizing that people living in a place not only can take kids hunting, not only can invest in the WMA, but they can be politically influential in terms of making sure the agency has the resources they need, making sure the operational budgets are sound. And so it's not just the partnership, which WHF, which is a fantastic and a brilliant one. We think the opportunity to engage, and let's be honest, there's a reason why White Lake got a $30 million budget last year. And yeah, I give a lot of credit to Jeff Wardlaw and Cyrus that have worked on that. But it was our committed volunteers that showed up at meetings, that went on tours, who spent time with legislators, who spent time with the commissioners. Listen, Wardlaw's from South Arkansas. Cyrus is from Richmond, Virginia. I'm from Bismarck. None of those are Louisiana zip codes, FYI. And we don't vote there, and we don't have EAUX on the back of our names. And so it was those people. It was not just, it was the investment they made in WHF and all the rest of that, but it was their ability to build relationships with the right people to help catalyze those bigger buckets of funding. Yep. So I think it's the direct investment through WHF, but also harnessing that passion and channeling it to really good policy outcomes, we think is going to be super impactful as well.
I mean, if I could describe sort of a generic process that happened, this is what I think happens, is the chapter talks to their regional director as an example and says, man, we got this, there's this place we like to hunt, and a bunch of us hunt there, and the boat ramp is completely, it's falling apart, and we talk to the manager, and there's no money in the budget, and what we're going to do. And then they gather up, and they go, okay, we've got, $1,200 in our Waterfowl Heritage Fund, okay? And then they go out to the manager and say, we got $1,200, we can fix a boat ramp. And the manager goes, it's going to take like $8,000 to fix that. And then the volunteers go, okay, we got $1,200, so that means we need, help me with some math here, $6,800, right? $8,000. Okay, and the manager says, well, I don't have $6,800. Well, what do you have? Well, I got $1,500. I can pull. Okay, good. So now we got $1,500. So we got 12 and the 15. We add those together. Well, who else do we need to talk to? And the volunteers go do all that work. They go and talk to people, and they say, okay, or they go call the state and say, can you find us a few more shekels, right? And so they take a little bit of energy and a tiny bit of money, and then they create this momentum. And then other people just start showing up. They want to then be a part of it. And that's how it seems to happen time and time and time again. And again, John is honestly one of the smartest guys I know on the issue of what's facing waterfowl across this continent. But no one can keep up with everything that's happening, at everything that's going on, at every WMA and at every WPA and at every...
That's our feedback mechanism.
And so it's the volunteers that do that on our behalf. I have told the same story about a lake in North Carolina for
Lake Norman
for 20 years. That's what happened. They called us and said, we have a problem, we need your help, and we're happy to lean in and help out where we can. And that's just how the system works. And so, you brought up a point earlier, and I had this sort of visceral response. I remember us thinking about, man, if you open that phone up like that, what's going to happen? Our boat might get swamped here. But it's amazing. We have found a way to work with these folks that we just keep expanding our capacity to work on those kind of issues, and we're doing it more and more across more different states and provinces than we ever have, and again, we couldn't do it without those volunteers that are out there that say, hey, I know, I've talked to these men, we know what it needs, we know what it takes, we need a little push, we need a little help. And a lot of times that's what WHF is. It's just enough energy to just create the spark, and then the spark leads to more things happening. And it's amazing to me. A lot of times I think the states, we found 30,000, we can help with that. That's great. Now we got enough money to fix that, and we might be able to do something else. So, again, I don't know that system, it's not big enough to fix all these problems. It's just not. We just know that. But it is big enough and powerful enough to create sparks all over the place that will then lead to bigger and more solutions.
What do they say? Many hands make light work?
That's exactly the model that seems to have worked for us, and it's been an absolute blessing in terms of our event and chapter system.
Yeah.
Well, and the thing about it is, I don't think it could be overstated enough, although maybe we have overstated enough. But we can't, there's a lot of work that we can do. You can hire contractors to put out hen houses and trap, and we can hire graduate students to do good science, and Todd and Jay can do pretty cool analysis. That's math stuff. I don't understand it. But there's a lot of the work that's really important to this organization that isn't housed within the four walls of this building or within our staff. And it's this partnership, and Jason long used the notion of an empowerment model that give people that care and have passion about these things some set of tools and resources, and they'll go create great outcomes. And man, do we have incredible examples of that. And I think one of the things that I'm most excited about through the Restore Our Refuges thing is telling those stories about those great people. Because let's be honest, we're just here to augment their desires and wishes. We're instruments for them to achieve the outcomes they want. This isn't about Delta Waterfowl. This is about duck hunters in some place. And I think this campaign, or this effort that we're undertaking right now, is going to give us the opportunity to celebrate what some of those people have done in a really important way. And I get a little emotional thinking about, the people that have, like Brandon, that did so much that could catalyze things they probably never imagined. But it's Brandon, and Brandon's the one that comes to my mind because he's a dear friend and he's no longer with us. But there are a lot of these people around the country that have the same stories, and I'm looking forward to working with those people to tell those stories.
Yeah, I mean, Brandon is a great example, and he was a fantastic guy, and it was a loss to waterfowling. When he left us, I would stop short of attributing any name, because I have lots and lots of them. And if I open that up, first off, we don't have enough podcasts, and second of all, I would inevitably get a phone call from the 5 or 6 that I'm going to forget probably. But I have met so many people who are working with their local WMA and refuge managers already. They're dependent on those people. When they put on youth workshops, that's who they're inviting to come out to give a talk, to present to the kids, to do that sort of thing. They're talking to them constantly. They're interacting with them. They're managing wood duck box programs. And I know people that are managing wood duck box programs in partnership with state agencies. And they're just a human. It's just a human with a real job who does regular other things, who's also managing a wood duck box program. Like, it's amazing what folks will do for conservation. And it just excites me anytime we create an opportunity to just unleash that on the world. It's amazing what happens. Brandon and White Lake is a beautiful, wonderful flagship example, but it has happened so many places, so many times. And so we're just trying to, as John pointed out, we're trying to aggregate all that energy under one concept and address these bigger issues maybe at the federal level that, again, we believe can be addressed. And we think this could be a real opportunity for waterfowling to plant a flag in this century right now, to say we're going to continue forward for this next 100 years, this century we're in now, and we're going to do it with good, high-quality public assets that are well managed. It's there to do. I believe it's there to do. And I believe it's just a little bit of inattention and a little bit of, everybody's busy and we got a lot going on and things just happen over time. I was having a conversation with someone recently, and they even proposed to me that maybe the 90s put us all to sleep. Maybe the 90s were so good, right? 97, 98, 99, right? We remember the good old days. Maybe it was so good that we all just kind of went to sleep a little bit. We just kept waiting for 99 to come back. It's going to come back around, right? And there was a whole bunch of stuff happening in the background, not the least of which was loss of CRP and the fact that we were in weirdly long wet periods that had some impact on what was happening up here in the spring. But I think in the background, at least since 2010, what we know is these budgets have not gone up. The staffing has gone down, and the resulting impact has been degraded public lands. And so I think there's a real opportunity to address that, to fix it. I think there's a political climate right now that points to people wanting to get this done. And I'm hopeful that we can, along with our volunteers and our donors and our supporters and our agency partners, to take advantage of it.
What do I say to that other than amen? I'm not sure. I know what to say. It's probably time for us to wrap this one up. But I think we're going to hit the stop on this one. This episode is going to end, but I would ask the listener to think of this as more of the pause button.
Mhm.
This is just the beginning of the conversation.
Right.
And so on behalf of you guys, I'm going to give our word to the listener that we're going to be documenting and sharing the many successes that will be taking place in Washington, D.C., state capitals, county offices, all the way down to the chapter battles, wins, successes. So we'll get you back on, John.
Yep.
Jason, we'll get regional directors who play such a vital role in this. We'll bring chapters on to talk about what drives their passion, what drives their success and achievement. So this is just the beginning. Thank you guys for your time, talent, and energy. And thanks for the listener for listening in. Guys, we'll get you back on here. Thanks for your time.
Sounds great. Look
All right.
forward to it.
You bet. Take care.
The Voice of the Duck Hunter, a podcast presented by Delta Waterfowl.